All right. Did the button work this time? I think the button worked this time. Waiting. I don't see it streaming. There we go. Okay. It popped in. You know? I think that the time period from 7:50 to 8 o'clock doesn't exist. I don't think anybody can convince me that that time, those 10 minutes do not exist in this world. All right, let's get into. Let's see, where's a Chrome window? Did I quit it? No, I didn't. Okay. We're gonna go into not the Skiing repo. The Skiing repo isn't what we're doing today. Skiing repo, interesting though. GitHub added, I guess, GitHub issue types. I guess they added this a while back, but I really haven't been using them. Planning to use them a little bit more though. Want to make a couple of like workshop issues and stuff. We've got this project over here that I think has some old workflow stuff. Boxes game, that's old. So I think one of the things, this is an old version of this, like we've got the 0.16 versions of a bunch of these even done. So, I think for 2048, one of the interesting things is we removed the like ability to animate. And if we go to the Bevy docs, I guess the docs aren't really what I want here. Where's a serialized animation clip? Version of an animation clip suitable for serializing as an asset. Cool. So animation clips are cool, but if we go to like animation events, right? I think this is a decent demo to look at. I don't know why this sidebar is so big. You'll see that the current implementation of the 2048 game itself doesn't have, or I guess it does. Is this not, this is not the right version. This is the old version. This is 2048. And this is the 0.16 build. Cool. So that version had transitions in the tiles, which is great. Transitions are cool. I think that transitions are not the point of that workshop. So I think I'm just going to leave them out. And the reason behind that, this is the animation events example in the Bevy repo, but it's easier to see on GitHub. So let's go check that out. Animation events. So we've got animation clip, right? We can create an animation clip, set the duration of the clip, add an event. We then have to add that to an animation graph. We have to introduce the concept of a player. We have to play the animation. And then we have to add the animation graph and the animation player to some entity. And this isn't a ton of code, right? It's what, 68 to 95. So it's like 30 lines. This is the current version for 0.16. It doesn't include like tile transitions, right? They just snap to their next position. And we could introduce that back If I did it, I would want to do it through animation clips. I think that one of the things that is interesting about upgrading games from version to version is that if you depend on a third-party crate and that third-party crate doesn't update for, say, like the release candidate, right? So you get like, we'll say three to 4 weeks for the release candidate series, right? 0.16 RC1 or something like that. RC1 came out, I guess the docs didn't build that time, but it's a couple weeks ago at this point. So like you can kind of think of the release process as like a month-long lead up to the stable version of Bevy. And if you have third-party crates that you depend on for things like this, like a workshop or like a game or whatever, then you push the timeline back and back and back, right? So you end up with potentially not being able to update whatever this is until all of your dependencies update. If you are doing educational material like this, right? Because this isn't like a game that I'm shipping to Steam, right? This is like meant for somebody else to look at, to read, to understand what's going on, to have some lessons written, have some things about it, like how do you implement a custom command, right? And if you look at the cargo TOML, like Rand and iter tools are never going to block an upgrade. Bevy, we can bump up to whatever we want to. I think we don't have any tracing in here. There's an issue with or RC4. There's an issue with the Bevy log crate where you can't use certain tracing syntax. Let's also bump this to 2024. Let's just do both bumps at the same time. Like Rand is never going to block an upgrade. Iter tools is never going to block an upgrade. Bevy is going to have like 3 to 4 weeks of release candidate before it actually, ships as stable. But if you start adding things in here, like third-party crates, one of the ones that does easings is Bevy easing. And like Bevy easing is like Bevy easings, Bevy easing, and Bevy, I don't know. There's a couple of them that are all like very, very, very similarly named. But like this is not an unmaintained crate by any means, right? Like this gets an update for every version of Bevy. But it only got its 0.16 update maybe last week, right? April 3rd. So maybe it's been 2 weeks. It's been a week or two before that. Everything has to do this though. Everything you use in the workshop has to do this. So if you use Bevy Asset Loader currently has a release, but I don't think it's on crates.io, right? Apparently this is not going to let me scroll down this menu unless it's all the way down here. Oh, it does have one now, I think. Yeah, so it does have an RC release now. But like you got to go through and check all these things. Asset Loader and easings are like really good examples of crates that are keeping up to date. But if you look at let's do, I don't want to call anything out, but let's look at Bevy Tenua, because I know that I use it in another project. I know that it doesn't have an RC. So like Bevy Tenua is a character controller. If you do a 3D game and it uses a character controller and you decide to use Bevy Tenua as a dependency, either you have to go update this and keep it up to date as soon as you want it up to date, or you have to wait for it to get up to date. And Bevy Tenua is a good example because Bevy Tenua includes support for like 4 different versions of physics crates, right? So Tenua can use Rapier or Avian, 2D or 3D. So you end up with these 4. There's also some legacy support for like Avian before it was Avian, so XBBD, so things like that. And if you want to do the upgrade for Tenua, then you have to now wait for Rapier 2D and 3D, AV and 2D and 3D, etc. And that's not a knock on like Tenua, right? Like it wants to be a widespread, like support all of the physics crates kind of crate. But what that means is that if I choose to use Tenua in a workshop, that delays the update of the workshop until after typically the stable release. Just timeline wise, things have a hard time updating like that. So picking, I think that animation clips don't fit the complexity bar. It's a little awkward to not have animations. And they would fit. So what I might do is write the code and see what it looks like. But I think in my heart, I know that it's just a thing that people won't want to do. Right. I think if you want to learn how to do animated stuff from point to point, then you will do a different workshop. And then I need like an animation workshop, something like that. So I think I'm going to leave it out completely. If I want to teach like how to use animation clips, I do a dedicated like how to use animation clips kind of workshop or game or whatever. Because one of the things that I figured out over time is basically that people don't like full games for educational material. I feel like I was on the other side of that personally. I was definitely looking for like things that were complete. Things that are complete interest me a lot, but they don't interest people who are going through like, how do I use, Bevy to do whatever, right? Hey, Alejandro. Good morning or whatever it is near you. How are you doing today? So I think we're not going to do animation clips. This could turn into a run schedule. I think that fundamentally I originally thought 2048 was going to be like a true introductory workshop, and I don't think it actually is for various reasons, and that's partially because like you have to build a grid abstraction before you can do the game, right? You have to build like a board and tile positions and spawn things on tile positions and understand how transforms work and whatever. So you end up with like all of this. Okay, we have this thing. I want to, take a tile position and turn it into a board position or whatever. What are we doing today? We're working on like 0.16 release candidate updates for like workshops and some of the long tail of games that are in the Rust Adventure repos. So for example, one of the things that I know is not up to date currently, because it was never a workshop, is asteroids. Yeah, asteroids. So last time we worked on that was approximately a year ago, but people seem to find it somewhat useful. So I would like to take this and, update it a little bit. There's not much to this overall. But yeah, that's the idea. The idea is to take some of these things. Are there issues here? Yeah. So a couple of things like that. Good morning. Could you please have the repo for the 2048 game? Would be interested in your way of implementing the logic of the game into Bevy. Yeah, it's on the Rust Adventure 2048. This is it. Rust Adventure 2048. The 0.16 version isn't up on the website yet, so there's no like lessons for it. That is a 0.16 stable thing that I'm working on. It's actually what the stream is for. This needs to not be main. This needs to be like 0.16. 0.16 was updated very recently. Let's do settings, branches, not rule set. How do I do this? What is the best alternative now for Blenvy? It's not supported with Bevy 0.15. I mean, since you're asking me, I'm going to point you to the thing that I made, which is bevyskein.dev. This should give you enough information. There's even an FAQ about how it relates to Blenvy. This is got a 0.15 and a 0.16 release. So that's what I would point you to. There are other people who are, I think that this is the best alternative to Blenvy, assuming that you're continuing using Blender. There are other people who were using Blenvy for various reasons, and they intend to do like level design in like Trench Broom. So that is also an option if you want to move away from Blender and start using something else. I think Jan has Bevy Trench Broom now. I didn't see an actual release for Bevy Trench Broom, but I saw the channel get created. So this is by Noxmore, but yeah, this works for certain kinds of games as well. This is like an old Quake editor. So yeah, if you want to use Blender, I think this is the best approach for Blender. If you want to use other tools, there are other tools out there. That's what I would say. How do I set the main branch? I don't want to set a... Wasn't this like an easy checkbox at one point? I don't want branch protections. I just want... settings. I'm in settings. Under default branch. Default branch where? Settings, drop down, and then click settings. General, maybe? There we go. And now I need to actually remember what the name of the branch is because it's not going to autocomplete for me. Great, great. Love this. Would really love GitHub to focus on, you know, code related stuff and not some other things that they've been focusing on lately. No, not rename, not rename. I don't want to rename it. Switch to another branch. Why would I want to rename it on GitHub? That's so weird. Yes, that will affect new pull requests and clones. I get that. This is a thing where people only want the latest. Cool. In general, maybe. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I don't know why it didn't send me. I feel like I clicked on this. I guess I clicked on branches immediately, didn't I? Because, like, why would a branch setting not be under branches? But okay, fine. Should do a social image here too at some point. I think everybody doesn't remember that this exists. This is actually kind of cool. If you start posting your GitHub repo around, it will use this as an open graph image, which is nice. Yeah, some people aren't using main still, which is kind of silly at this point. Cool. So that's the default branch, 2048. I need to close this issue because we already did this stuff. $14, $15, and I didn't close this fast enough, basically, is what I'm saying there. I don't know why it still shows up in this project. I don't think I've ever found like a what do you call it, like a Kanban board solution or anything like that that has ever worked for me. um, Snake, asteroids, block breaker. So asteroids and block breaker are interesting. What else do we have? I think this is probably this is using Hanabi for that particle effect, I think. I don't remember if I changed it or not. I do think it's using Avian. So maybe we'll go in and update this. This needs an update. This was an old one. And this was never a workshop either, so it needs like an actual update. So maybe we do that. Let's do block breaker today. Let's see, git clone this. And this is going to be interesting because it's going to be like, man, it's somewhat frustrating that you can force close a VS Code instance and it will keep this like empty file. But if you try to like actually close it, it's not like we won't auto save this for you. You have to crash it to auto save it. Okay, so we've got quite a bit going on here. Oh, this is using Rapier. This is old. I think that this could be an interesting introduction to Avian. The first thing I want to think about is if I'm going to turn this into a workshop, right? What are people going to actually learn from it, right? What are the things that people are going to take away from this specifically? And I think this has a decent, simple concept of levels that is interesting. I think that the scoring probably doesn't matter at all. So we probably just get rid of scoring completely. I can't imagine it. I don't even, yeah, this should compile, but we have kind of this like block abstraction. We can probably get rid of this completely. Oh yeah, this is old. Block removal. This is like collision. Some of them have specific amounts of damage that you need to do to them, which is cool. Spawning power-ups, custom commands. This is kind of like the same board concept that we use in the other ones too, which is kind of funny. Like I end up with this like, oh, this is a 2D grid abstraction in a whole bunch of games, even though not all of them are board games and whatnot. spawn ball, geometry builder. We don't need that anymore. We have shapes inside of Bevy. Spawn power up. We can do a capsule. The capsule can drop. That'll all be fine. Sensors and stuff are easy to upgrade. Transforms, board positions. What a weird place for those commas. I don't know why those commas are before everything. Let's see. Lib has a couple of components. A couple of components I probably didn't get to, like upgrades for gunship and whatnot. I think overall, the question here is really, should this be an avian project or should this be Bevy colliders, like built-in Bevy colliders? I think the game UI really doesn't have much to it. If we look at the demo here, I don't know that we even need that like initial menu. We'll probably ditch that menu. We have the paddle, we have the collision with the paddle, we have the bricks disappear. Technically, we could have multiple levels. There is a like container, if you will, around the whole outside. I think I used a polyline originally. I think this is easiest for newer Bevy developers to build with Avian. Although all of the shapes inside of this are fully capable of not being Avian related. And I think this is not physical, is the other thing in my mind. The only problem with doing manual colliders and not doing like a physics-based simulation is that you have to handle the collisions yourself, like the directions of the ball and stuff. And I think math scares people. So I think the benefit of using Avian for this would be that you don't have to handle the math. You can just kind of be like, it's physical, have fun. Which I think is actually probably a good thing in this case. Sorry if this is too off topic. No, this stream is for people to ask questions for sure. So, what do I think of Spacetime DB compared to Bevy? They don't compete, do they? They're like different things. Right? Like Spacetime DB is a theoretical like multiplayer database or whatever they're advertising as, right? This is not like a competitor with Bevy. This is something you would integrate with Bevy for multiplayer stuff, is my understanding. It's always interesting to see a VC funded company. There are some benefits to that and some negatives to that. Like a VC funded company, like their pricing might be super low right now, but they'll probably change it 3 times over the next 2 years. Looks like converts to open source in 4 years. That feels weird. I guess I appreciate that they're trying. Databases are really hard to bootstrap. Like you've got to basically build the entire thing before it's useful to anybody. So I get why they would go VC funding. I think that if I was thinking about using stuff, multiplayer games is not really what I would try to go for. It looks really unique in that you can record player activity. You wanted to make a language learning game so you can utilize all the data. I don't think you need a multiplayer database to like have tracking for a language learning game. Right? like multiplayer implies to me that this is like supposed to be for like real-time multiplayer stuff, right? This is an MMORPG or an MMO. Um, right. Their highlight game, which I know nothing about, just to be clear, seems to be an MMO of some kind. So it's like real-time position syncing, like that kind of stuff. You don't need a special database if you are not doing real-time stuff. Like you just need SQL, right? Like set up a server, have some API calls. If you're doing a language learning game, like I'm thinking like Duolingo or something like that, right? Like that's what I'm thinking in my head. So like if you're doing like a Duolingo where there's like cards and questions and things like that, those are like very slow interactions comparatively, like compared to anything MMOE and anything, especially anything FPSE, anything like et cetera, right? So you don't need special database support if what you're doing is when somebody selects a language answer, then like that goes to some kind of storage or something. Like you just don't need this. Your plan was to make a mobile game and then add multiplayer to it, so it seemed like something to add, but you don't need like an MMO type setup. Yeah, I mean it depends on the kind of multiplayer, right? Like this seems to be more real-time focused, which I think is the harder thing, right? Like if you're gonna do FPS networking or something and you need data for that, this seems to be just SQL. So I'm not really sure actually what the answer is there. It's like no more Docker, no more Kubernetes, microservices, whatever. I hope you're not deploying Kubernetes, because as a solo indie dev, you should not be deploying Kubernetes. It's faster than SQL. What does faster than SQL mean? SQL is not, how do I frame this? SQL is a collection or a family of languages that have implementations in a bunch of different databases, right? You can't be faster than SQL. You can be faster than a specific database's implementation for a specific query. You can't be faster than SQL, right? Like space-time is 200 milliseconds where SQL is 1200 milliseconds. So you're saying that, trying to figure out how to best frame this, that sounds to me like marketing BS, right? Like, what do you mean SQL is 1200 milliseconds? If all SQL databases took a full second to respond, right? Every website on the internet would have at least 1 second of latency when you loaded it. And the load times for websites are measured in like low hundreds of milliseconds. So that immediately triggers my like, this is BS, right? Like making a SQL query does not take a full second. If a SQL query takes a full second, something is wrong. I haven't watched their intro video, so I don't know what that is referencing. I don't know what that benchmark is, but quite often companies that are VC funded like this, who are marketing like that, will just market with unsubstantiated statements. Benchmark for a query. Yeah, but a SQL query is like if you select 1+1, right? That effectively measures the latency between where you are in the SQL database. So like that's a SQL query, right? If you do like an indexed key access, right? Like you have an ID, it's indexed, you're going to that index. It's not going to take you a full second to return like one row in a database. That's wild. Like to think that that would be the default, or to sell like market that that's the default. That's wild. Um, I I would say that I would assume there's more context around it, but like if they're selling this as faster than SQL, they have to be talking about specific use cases. Otherwise, it's meaningless. You assume that's including network latency. If you're including network latency, then it's not a database benchmark, right? Like think about like, okay, so it takes what, the speed of light is 40 milliseconds from like California to New York effectively, right? What was it, like Boston to something else? I can never remember the name of this post. Did I kill my internet again on my laptop? I keep doing this. I keep like knocking the cable out. I don't know if the network adapter is just dying, or the port is dying, or something is dying. It's only my laptop though. But yeah, so like the network latency, speed of light is like, or the speed of the network, sorry. If you do like a round trip from California to New York and back, I think that like theoretical minimum is like 80 milliseconds or something like that. Not the ping time, not the network latency. There's a specific post that I'm thinking of. I'm not going to be able to find it, am I? Maybe this person references it. But yeah, I mean, like across public internet, you're talking about whatever. So, yeah, you just got here, don't have the details, but you don't see how else they would get 1 second for a SQL query. Like 1 second for a SQL query, I'm pretty sure you can go around the world in less than a second. So like, but if you're including network latency, if you're including the fact that you have to go from like California to New York or California to Europe to your database, right? That is not a database benchmark. You are lying about your database speed using network latency, right? Again, I haven't seen them actually say this. I didn't watch whatever their launch video was that said this. So like, grain of salt. But if that's what they're saying, they are wrong. In the video they measured, this is for 1 million entities, it looks like you're saying. When are you querying 1 million entities? So they're saying it's 1 second to query 1 million entities for a SQL query. Yeah, I don't know. I can't find the benchmark on the site, so there's not much I can say about it other than like, if the implication is that SQL is slow, that's a really weird implication. Yeah, I'm not going to watch the video on stream. I'll watch it later. I'll look it up. Yeah, I mean, let me frame it this way. You have to have a implementation. So whenever we talk about benchmarks, right? We can talk about theoretical speed, right? People talk about this with Rust all the time. People go, oh, cloning is slow, don't clone, your program's performance will crash, right? But cloning doesn't matter in a web HTTP request. Your time is going to be absolutely dominated by network latency, right? If you clone something in Axum web server, right? And the person from California is making a request to New York, a clone is not your problem, you know? So like benchmarking it and being like, oh, clones are slow. Like technically, yeah, if you're trying to do something real time, you shouldn't be like reallocating all the time or whatever. But like the context is really important, right? If you're building a web server and you're serving a web request, then it doesn't matter. If you're querying a million entities, what you're trying to do that every frame? What is the implication there? But anyway, yeah, Spacetime DB and Bevy are not competitors. To go back to the original question, Spacetime DB is like a database where you store stuff. Bevy is like the front end to interact with that database, right? And like, do you do the queries from your game? That's up to you. Do you send them through an API that's validated? Like all of that kind of stuff, right? But for most things, I would assume that like multiplayer real time is kind of the use case there, right? If you have like a networked FPS game, or you have, I guess, millions of entities for whatever reason, then sure. But if you're building a card game, if you're building like a language learning app, if you're building like anything that's like of not extreme size, probably doesn't matter. But as always, my advice is always build and benchmark your use case. It's like, don't rely on marketing videos to tell you whether something is fast for your use case or not. Build a test case that is representative of your workload. Send that workload in multiple places and look at the results. That's really the only way that you're going to know. Okay, so I think that, let's see, we probably ditch Hanabi for the moment, specifically because Hanabi doesn't have a 0.16 release yet. I think Avian does. We can drop Leon because Bevy has built in like spheres and stuff now. Asset Loader has a 16 release. So I think we're good. Let me leave this up and do a git clone into a new repo. Because we're going to kind of like follow the vibe of this, but I want to rebuild it. Was it GCO Orphan Bevy 0.16? So if you do a git checkout with -- orphan, you end up with a branch that has no, like nothing, right? I think a lot of these are particle effects. I was thinking about making this like an LDTK compatible kind of thing at one point. I think that would be really cool. I don't think we need to start off with. I think that we can just replace what we have. Buttons we don't need, fonts we don't need. So I don't think we need anything that's in assets currently. So we'll just get rid of all of that. Roboto. There's a background, like uncolored desert background here that we could use. Maybe keep that. Screen recording, open graph, yada yada. So I think other than that, what is it? Assets, not fonts, uncolored desert. This is like a Kenny asset, if I remember correctly. And then we just kind of ditch everything else. Key background image. But yeah, I would be extremely skeptical if the implication was SQL is slow, because if there isn't more context there, like, people like to say Rust is fast, right? But what does that actually mean? You can write a slow Rust application. That's fully possible. So what does it mean when people say Rust is fast, right? If they're saying SQL is slow, it's kind of like the same thing, right? Like SQL is a spec more than it's a specific thing too, right? All databases effectively have their own implementation of SQL, right? If you write SQL for MySQL, that is not the same SQL that you're going to write for Postgres. Is it similar? Yeah. Is it something you can port from like database to database? Not really. So if they're saying they're faster than every SQL database on the market, that is a very specific like assertion that is very wide. Let's just remove the assets folder and then recheck out that desert. Let's get rid of our cargo stuff. Let's get rid of, there's nothing in README that we really want here, right? I think it's just that one image. Let's get rid of README. Let's get rid of source. I don't know that this will even work. Let's do a Bevy new. What do we call this? Block breaker. I think that probably put it in the wrong directory. Can we do it in this current directory? The one downside about the Bevy CLI is that it like changes the way that cargo generate works. So like this is effectively just calling cargo generate, but it doesn't supply the same options. So let me just do this, and then I'll move the things in that directory up a directory. Bevy has a CLI. Bevy has a like in progress CLI. Bevy has a, like, there's a CLI working group at the moment. This is the template that I was just using. So it's like the default minimal template with no real like extra stuff. But the Bevy CLI itself, you can find at the Bevy flock/Bevy CLI. And if you run this install command, you can have the Bevy CLI locally. The thing that it's most useful for is kind of like scaffolding a new minimal project. And part two is running WASM. So if you don't really want to, like, how do I say this? If you don't want to set up WASM yourself, the Bevy CLI has a runner that will run the Bevy app as WASM for you. I think they're going to try to get this out for the next Game Jam. So it should have a release soon. But until then, it is installed from the Git repo. This also has the linter in it. So what is that? Bevy lint, which I'm not going to run because I just scaffolded. But so interesting things coming down the pipeline for sure. This says nothing's in block breaker, but is that true? Okay, cool. So let's run this. Do I use AI in my workflow? You can't find a set of AI instructions for cursor like you would want to inform the AI of how to interact with the CLI in instructions to the AI. Why wouldn't you just run the help command for the CLI you're using? Like I find the approach there really confusing. Cuz like if you have a CLI, right? That CLI has help output. So if you're trying to figure out how to use it, then you should run the help output, right? Because that will tell you actually how to use it. I think that's really my response to. First of all, I don't use AI in my work at all, none of it. Right? There's a lot of reasons for that. But I fundamentally don't. The TLDR is I appreciate high signal in my tools, right? I appreciate when I do something, I want it to give me back like real information, actionable information. And AI is a low signal tool. It gives you back things that look like they should work, but actually don't quite often. It gives you back old APIs. It gives you back like things that don't exist. You have to constantly be checking it. And the things that I value in the tools that I use are that those tools are things that give me actionable information, right? So when the Rust compiler tells me there's an error, that is a real actionable thing that I can go deal with, right? It's giving me information about an issue with my program. I can go fix the issue with my program. If I ask an AI for something, it gives me back something that looks like it could be an answer, but is actually either not runnable, old, or broken in subtle ways, right? And it's worth pointing out that the hard part of software is not writing code. The hard part is debugging the code. And I think a great example of this is Skeen, actually. So Skeen is a project that is hard to manually check, right? So the approach here is don't build up 10,000 lines of Python or whatever to make Skeen work, right? To write things like snapshot tests that will tell me fundamentally whether something changed or not, right? Like I have a bunch of snapshot tests in here. Let's click on a random one, maybe camera 3D has some stuff in it. This is the serialization for camera 3D. When I run the snapshot test against Bevy 0.16.1 or 0.17, it will compare against this directly with the types that I gave it. And if there's a difference there, I know there's an actionable thing that I actually have to deal with. Right. Working with AI tools, that is not true. Right. Because they don't give you answers, they give you things that look like answers. And it's really important to understand the difference. Um, like if you want to use them, I'm not going to tell you to stop using them, right? But the things that I value about the work that I do, AI can't help with. So code dot you think it's really useful for Ruby on Rails development because you can do out-of-date projects? I don't, like, you can use out-of-date APIs? Is that what you're saying? Out-of-date APIs have security issues. You know? Like, if you're using like a full version back of a web framework, right? Let's see. Okay, so this is running. We don't really have anything set up here yet. We probably want to use Avian 2D. I think that's what we're going to go with. If we do, then we have to do stuff like this and set the friction and the restitution and stuff so that it works as if it's in like a non-gravity environment. The setup that we have here is basically the ball. There's a fill and a stroke, which we don't really need. This is the paddle. Paddle is some size. I want to know if I have a camera size here. We kind of do. This is a board size over 2. So we are kind of using that board abstraction. We don't really have to per se. Trying to decide if that's a good idea or not. Right? We could have this board abstraction. Let's start with a lib.rs. Let's do pub mod board and bring that in for the moment. I think, is this how I want to do it is really the question. I think that the placement of bricks doesn't really require a board, but it requires knowing where other things are placed. If we have to programmatically construct it, it's easiest to place it with integers. But we don't, strictly speaking, need to place it via integers or whatnot. What are our brick sizes here? Here are some blocks. Have some colors, block removal. Let's see, where do we have block? Mod blocks, main, block damage, cool. Where do we set up the actual spawning of these? Here's one level. So this is like the first level, so to speak, right? So we probably want to bring this in. Why do I have that capitalized? That's such a weird choice. This is spawning the level. This is spawning a power up. This is probably spawning the ball. I think those are the only three. UI main. I guess spawn level is the place that we handle brick spawning. So in this case, that means doing a get of the board resource for each of the rows, matching that alongside the definition that we have, and then we're kind of like using the board physical sizes to place these bricks. I think that's like okay. But if people wanted to do like a double height brick, it would prevent them from doing that. So let's start with just getting maybe a paddle on the screen and defining the camera. So let's do FN setup or startup, whatever we want to call this. I think I'm going to call it setup. We're probably going to need a commands in here. We're probably going to be spawning stuff in here, right? This is going to be like add systems, update, setup, not update, sorry, startup. And then we're going to be wanting to spawn shapes in. We don't have Bevy 0.16 currently installed, so let's do rc.4. I don't think I don't know that I'm going to use the Bevy CLI. So probably we leave this stuff because it's just config and I'll just be like, hey, there's some config here. But it's not the point of the project either. I think getting rid of this exists in the Bevy template and it basically removes like trace logs and stuff, which isn't going to matter for us. So let's go check modern APIs for spawning 2D shapes and start there. So spawning like rectangles and stuff has gotten a lot easier since the original version of this. You used to have to like, how do I frame this? It used to be that Bevy didn't have a bunch of different shapes, right? So you had to go to like a third-party crate if you wanted to have a bunch of different shapes, right? If you wanted to do some kind of like SVG drawing, you would bring in something that integrated with Leon or something like that. The Bevy examples having everything split out is mildly, it's not really what I want. I think that this probably won't be what we use. We are probably going to use, let's start with, what is the actual color that we used of the paddle last time? like a dark black. Let's do like slate 950. And we'll do the auto import for that. And then I'm going to go up here and do a star for the Tailwind color palette because we can keep using that. And I will use other Tailwind colors. One of the other nice things about not 0.16 specifically, but I think 0.15 introduced the concept of color palettes. So like the Tailwind color palettes now exist inside of Bevy like directly. We probably want to define our camera up front too. And we probably want to lock it to a specific size. So this will have a camera in it somewhere. They don't do anything specific, right? Spawn 2D. Not super interesting from that perspective. But I think that we would do camera. This is just going to be centered on 0, 0 at the moment. So viewport order is active. We don't care about any of this. HDR could be cool, like just throwing in some bloom. This is not overall what we want though. So what do we need? We need projection, orthographic projection. We want in here some stuff. What did I do here? No, okay. Orthographic projection. This then, come on, let me autocomplete. We're gonna do orthographic projection, default 2D. This is really nice compared to say like 0.14 where you had to remember to set like the near and far planes explicitly. I think we want scaling mode here. Scaling mode is going to be, scaling mode is not what I want. What do we want? We want scale and scaling mode. I wanted to lock this to a size. I thought that I was going to be able to do that via orthographic, but maybe I've been working with 3D cameras too much lately. Let's go check. Right, so the 2D camera component doesn't have anything. 2D render graph for a camera. A camera has a viewport and some other things. I don't think render viewport defines the area on the render target. So this is like if you wanted to do split screen or something like that. So none of this is really what we want. Sub camera view. That's something that I've never used. So then the question is like, there's orthographic projection, right? And we get near, far, viewport origin, scaling mode, scale, and rect. I think rect is what we want. The question here being, the camera 3D has settings for different things here, right? Wait, I'm blanking out on what this API actually is, aren't I? Let's go check the examples. Camera default. Did it just give me the wrong autocomplete? Yeah, it did give me the wrong autocomplete. Okay. It is scaling mode. That's what I thought it was. I think that the thing is that it's not the scaling mode that is in scope for some reason. So it's this scaling mode. Yeah. What scaling mode is in scope? Let's find out. Let t equals scaling mode. Fill center. That's got to be like UI stuff, right? Where's that coming from? OBS disconnected. Are we still streaming? Reconnecting successful. Are we good? Stream can see me? Oh, are my Bevy docs on 0.16? No, they aren't, probably. Yeah, you're right. That still doesn't answer like scaling mode in that sense. I don't know why we changed scaling mode to be something else. This is a texture scaling mode. I guess this is used more often. That would make sense. Right. Like 2D games are probably using far more sprites than cameras, so it makes sense for this to be the prelude. It's just unfortunate that there's that naming collision and that I wasn't aware of it. So let's do what? Fix to vertical probably, because this is going to be a vertical game. So we could do like 1080 or something here. HDR, probably something that we are going to want for Bloom. So I'm going to leave it there, but comment it out. I think that like activating Bloom when the ball hits would be cool. I don't know if that's going to actually like fit into the workshop. But I kind of want to see if it does, so we'll figure that out later. I think that these see 0, 0, 0 is fine. We've got a rectangle that's 50 by 100. This needs to be color from, just to be explicit. So we end up with a mesh, a color from the Slate 950. An orthographic projection, and we can run this. So this will put a paddle at 0, 0. If we're going to have a 1080 height, then we can drop this down by like a fixed size, right? So we probably end up with const game height, board height. What's good? Like if we're gonna do 1080, then the game height is 1080. We probably want this to be a Vec2. Only the height is going to be used for the camera. The width will be used for the board size. We just made a different choice in Flappy Bird, actually, which I think I have up on my other monitor. Don't have it up on my other monitor. Must have minimized it or something. So Flappy Bird, probably should have called it Flappy Bird, would have made more sense. Didn't call it Flappy Bird. We did this for camera. This is the wrong repo, I think. There we go. So we did the camera for Flappy Bird with an orthographic projection of Auto Max because we liked how this worked with the black bars on the sides and the top more than other ways. So if we're saying that we're going to scale mode fixed to vertical here, let's be consistent with what we name this. And let's say that we're assuming 1920 by 1080, I guess. I don't think that it matters as much. Because, like, how big is the board going to be, right? That's probably a per level thing. So maybe this won't be end up being a const. The width here, we'll just make like 600 or something. Doesn't really matter at the moment. The auto max is not what we want here then, because is it what we want? I don't think so. We'll find out in a second. Does it make any difference if we return the app new in main function instead of just calling it? You mean like this, where it gets returned like that? Basically, app new run, specifically the run function, didn't used to return this app exit. So in past versions of Bevy, this behaved differently. Is really what that is. It like fundamentally doesn't matter. And you might make a different choice based on, like, in some cases, you might wrap your game in like a CLI tool for whatever reason. At which point you might want to do like additional cleanup after the game closes or something like that. Basically what's happening here is the same kind of thing that happens in embedded or async or whatever, where you just like loop, right? And that loop, whenever that loop exits, your program ends. That's effectively what's happening here. Our app is running. Whenever our app is done, our program will end, right? If it crashes or returns a bad exit code, then it will return an error here, which will be an error code, which will actually get propagated through the actual application. Most people are probably not running like your game via CLI, like piping it to something else. So for the most part, this probably doesn't have any end user impact, but this just works now, whereas previously it didn't. So I think in most games, this doesn't have really any impact. If you're doing something like wrapping, you know, your game in a CLI to bootstrap it in different ways, or to pass different arguments, or to do something for dev or whatever, you can like not do this, but otherwise this is fine. I think in general, it's probably good practice if you aren't doing anything else to do this app exit return, because that means if the app does do something weird, that gets propagated out through the process. Um, you know, but does it really matter? No. So I was going to go with fixed vertical. I still like the idea of fixed vertical because the height is really what matters. I was thinking about the other case of like, what if you made it really thin and tall? But I think if you do that, I don't care. So we could choose a different scaling mode. I think this is a fine one. This is simple. There is our paddle, which is like way the wrong size. What size do we use in our original implementation? Custom commands, spawn ball, power up level. Didn't do a great job of co-locating the code for this one. All right, we actually implemented the 3 balls event. Okay, lib, starting game state menu. We probably aren't going to have a menu for this one. We're probably just going to have like text on screen that says press R to restart or something. I've covered it a couple of times, but I think that one of the things that people in general really don't like doing is like doing UI if they don't have to. There are people who are specifically looking for how do I build a menu, and other people who are like trying to figure out how Bevy works at all. And the people who are figuring out how Bevy works at all don't want to do UI stuff. So those are blocks, those are power-ups. This is the ball. In our setup, sprite, anchor, images, background. We can just copy this in, I guess. Orthographic projection in a different way. The scaling like values kind of changed a little bit over the last couple versions. That's the ball. This is the paddle. So our paddle is 220. Let's do 200 and we'll do 20. And then we'll also spawn this background in, which I think we should probably do first. Sprite bundle no longer exists, so we don't need it. We'll do sprite. This won't have a color. We don't need default because it's not going to be that anymore. I think this is just going to be image, if I remember correctly. We're going to need the asset server because we don't currently have whatchamacallit. We don't have Bevy asset loader in this one. I don't think we'll need Bevy asset loader because the only asset that I think we're going to have until Bevy Hanabi upgrades is going to be this background image. Fill struct fields, texture atlas. So this is going to be asset server dot load. I don't remember the path to this that we used, so let's go copy relative path and dump it in here. Just uncolored desert, that's fine. Texture atlas, color, flip, rect, image mode. I think this is all defaultable. I think anchor center, I think anchor center is the default. We'll find out in a second. This is just going to be 0, 0, right? We're just putting everything at the origin for the moment. This doesn't need to be mute. So we end up with something that is probably double the size that we need it to be. And should be behind everything. So we'll place this at -1. That will scale a bit. Like the background really doesn't matter all that much, so I'm not worried about it. I'm just going to put it there. It's going to be, you know, whatever size it is. I think that we probably want our paddle at a specific location, so let's do 1080, or rather canvas size over, let's see, split it into fourths. If we split it into fourths, then I think 1/4 is probably too high. And it's fine. I mean, it's not bad, right? Like it's not what I want. Let's put it down at 1/8 in the other direction. So we're at 0. We now need to do what, 3/8? We'll do it outside. So it'll go here. We could also do it inside, make it a little bit clearer. I don't know, like, from the people who are less familiar with math perspective, this is probably easier to read. So I think we'll leave it like that. We do need controls for the paddle. We probably need to put a component on the paddle. So let's start with like a paddle struct. If I could type, that would be great. So in addition to all of these things that are like kind of required or whatever, we will also throw paddle on here. I tend to put like extra components at the bottom, like markers and stuff, because I feel like these change less. But I add and remove things like this all the time. But it really doesn't matter where you put these things. So if this is a paddle and we want to do paddle control, right, then I really didn't put that into its own file. I didn't even put that into like track damage, paddle speed, gravity, 3-ball stuff. I think that in particular, avian is good for like, how do I say this? Skipping manual implementation of physics, right? Like we don't necessarily need to have physical reactions, but I think to start out, most people don't want to manually implement collisions in physics and stuff like that. So in the interest of keeping people interested and continuing on to the next one, there will be something else at some point where it makes sense to do a manual implementation of, collisions and stuff. I don't know that this is the right one to do that in. Where did I put the paddle control? Am I going to use dynamic or kinematic rigid bodies? Kinematic for the paddle, right? Because we don't want the ball to hit the paddle and like knock the paddle away. Although that would be very fun if there was like a really heavy ball that would like run into the paddle and then the paddle changes to dynamic and like flips around a little bit. But the paddle, we don't want to move anywhere, right? So it's going to be kinematic. And then the ball is going to be dynamic. And then the blocks are probably fixed. So they'll be static, right? Sprite. Ball collisions. Here's our movement. Here's our old movement with a paddle speed. Right, so this is looking for the kinematic character controller from Rapier, which doesn't exist. So currently, we'll just look for the transform, I think. This is button input or input button? I never remember. Button input? Button input. That reminds me of the 3 blue 1 brown video of the number collisions between a ratio of high mass to low mass converging to pi. Oh yeah, like that little thing where like it's between an immovable object, like a small ball, and like a big object. So this is going to be, I guess we're calling this controller. We have single now. There's only ever going to be one paddle. I actually don't think that's true for like the game as a whole though, because you could have an upgrade that like splits the paddle in two. And then you have like two paddles side by side being controlled by the same, motion or whatever. So I think the query from like a game mechanics perspective makes more sense, even though we only have one paddle and really only intend to build one paddle. So we don't need to match because this is going to be, let's name this transform. These aren't matches. And we'll just add paddle speed to it for the moment. Key D. Why I did equals this, I don't know. Let's get rid of iter mute. I think it's more common to see this, so I want to introduce this rather than introducing iter mute. So paddle control. And then this will go in fixed update, right? Trying to be better moving forward about putting things that are game logic related in fixed update so that people who go check out this code go, oh, fixed update, what is that? Because like it's one of those things that you don't notice until you try to ship a game with, that is the wrong. Dot X. I didn't realize that we had. I didn't realize that we had implementations for like vec3 minus equal f32, because that's what was just happening, right? I feel like that has to be fairly new. That's very cool, but I do also feel like that has to be fairly new. It's not what we want in this case. We want basically this. Right? And then the way we had it set up in the other implementation is we drew a box around everything with kind of like a alpha white background. I think this is where we start to get into like laying out the bricks in specific locations. I don't think it's particularly important to put bricks in specific locations. I wonder if that is even something worth including in the workshop. Right, because yes, Brick Breaker is supposed to have like rows of bricks, right? But does it matter? If somebody wants to build rows of bricks, that's a really good jump off point to be like, oh, how do I like put these things in the right places? So while it would look a little weird if we didn't, I don't think it matters all that much. So I think it's a good time to introduce the ball, which will be a sprite. Let's do my question is, do I want to do a game state at all? I'm trying to think about, so the game is going to be on, it's going to be playing. I think that it's useful to have like a reset button of some kind to restart the game, just because like having to close and reopen the app to restart the game really isn't great. But we don't want to build out too much infrastructure. Again, people don't like building menus. They don't like doing UI work. In these cases, we're going to do dedicated UI workshops, not UI alongside other games. So the question is, what is the actual minimal set of stuff that is required to make this work? And I think that the answer in my head for what I would do is I would use game states. I think the answer for what is the absolute minimum would be if there is no ball on the screen, or we've hit like game over or something. Like we very quickly get into like, okay, if there's no ball on the screen, fine, that's our state. But as soon as you get into like, okay, there could be no ball on the screen because it's respawning, then you start getting into like, okay, So if we're going to show a message that's like press R to restart, then we have to hold some state about whether we should be restarting or not. And at that point, we go immediately back into states. So I think we're just in states. I think states are, the states feel pretty fundamental. So I think that we're just going to go with states. Right? I think that including states in basically every Bevy game makes a lot of sense because it's so fundamental to like games having different phases or things being restarted or whatever, right? Where is state, states? And yes, to some extent I can write this from memory, but I find it really useful for stream to show how to get to a lot of these examples because I feel like a lot of people don't realize these examples exist. So if I on stream constantly go to the examples to get the code rather than writing it from scratch, that shows people consistently that these examples exist, which I think is really useful. So this is not going to be menu. This is going to be like game over will be the default state, I guess. And then playing. And we'll state scope everything to playing, I guess. So game over will spawn in like a piece of text that says press R to restart. You'll hit R, it'll switch. That'll all be state scoped. The board will spawn. You'll start playing the game. At some point you will lose. Everything will despawn and the text will come back up. The other option, of course, is to like persist some elements over time. Like leave the board up all the time, for example, and only do like brick cleanup when you're starting a new game. I do kind of like that from a like user experience perspective, because then you get to see what the board looked like when you were done. So, but then you get into like resetting specific elements of the paddle and whatever, which becomes a little bit more wonky. Trying to think about which is better for the workshop. I think just doing a full cleanup is going to be fine. Not state scoped event. It's enable state scoped entities. Right. So state scoped entities, that means that if we are playing, then we have the paddle, right? So this is a state scoped entity. For app state playing. So this will despawn. I think that that puts it into a different category of system. We've got the orthographic projection. We've got the background sprite. So this then goes into like new game. Right? And that brings these things out. And then new game is going to fire not on startup. So startup is going to set up, right? And then add systems on enter app state playing. We're going to run new game. And that will spawn that. So now we need like the equivalent, but for game over. right? So we need a show restart button function of some kind. And we will also want update for restart game dot run if in state app state game over. So we'll have show restart button, which will spawn the restart button like text, and then restart game will listen for that event, which, you know, could be in update. It could also be, I think, double run if. Run if input just pressed, key code R, key R. So this should only run if we hit R, and this will run on enter. So we'll just do an info show restart button, and we'll do fn restart game, same thing, right? So if we run this, we get a panic because I forgot something. State transition schedule is missing. Did you forget to add states plugin or defaults plugin before calling init state? This is one of the weird things about state. They're plugin order dependent. So show restart button, you can see in the terminal down here, if we hit R, we get a restart game. So these are both working. We need mute next state is a res next state. I forget the exact syntax. I hate that GitHub overrides triple click. So we've got next state for app state, and we do next state.set app state playing. So this should be enough overall to hit R and see the paddle show up, which it is. Yeah, simulations are fun in Bevy too. I think Bevy is a really good platform, so to speak. There's a lot of people using it for like 3D, like CAD programs or visualizations of scientific data and things like that, which are obviously not games. So like games are like one application, but having Bevy ECS as a state system and having all of the infrastructure around what you need to build a game has wider applications than just building games. And being able to render things on screen in an interactive way is one of those things. So mute commands. We need to spawn some text here. So I think that this can just be text. Can I do this as a tuple? Text new. Press R to restart game. And then we probably are going to want to change like the font size and stuff. We're not going to do any kind of like custom font stuff, right? No code actions available. Why not? Come on, we both know that that is not filled out correctly. Text style not found in this scope. Is it just style these days? I don't think so. UI, text, text new, text font. I guess text font has the text size. We don't want that. We just want to use the default, I don't know, 67. Why not? Let's see what that does. So press R to restart game. It's kind of like big and whatnot. Not the right color either. Text color. This is a tuple. Let's do slate 950. I think we need the into here. I think this needs to be a color, not a, yeah. So one downside of the color palettes is that you do need to like convert them from what they are into what you need to use. I think this is fine. This doesn't need to be anywhere else. If somebody wants to like center it or whatever, that is totally acceptable in terms of like a good jump off point. So this is in the game over state. It's scoped to game over. So we run this. This goes here. I hit R. It disappears. We get the paddle. We don't have any game to end yet. Right? So let's start with that. So we so far have like game over, paddle control. We need to do, I think, like board edges and collision. We need to spawn a ball first. So let's start with spawning a ball. So in new game is where we'll spawn a ball. This will be very, very, very similar to the code that we just wrote. Let's do a circle. New. Radius of, I don't know, is 10 a good number? I don't know. We'll find out. Let's make this like actually white, I think. The game is pretty bright in general, so I think a white ball like that is fine. It's still like it has the paddle component on it, so it's moving with the paddle. And I think having it be like the size of the paddle is kind of nice. So let's get rid of that paddle on the ball. Let's name this ball, right? And we'll create a component to label this. And I think it's time to start with physics, right? This needs to be in a different place, obviously. So let's do that first. We're just going to put it at 0, I think. 0, 0, 0. That sounds right to me. Put it in the center of the screen, right? Starts here. I think I would like some kind of outline on it, but I'm not terribly concerned about that. So let's start with what? Actually, you know what? Really easy way to do an outline. If we do this, and then we do children, might be a good way to introduce some hierarchy. There won't be a lot of hierarchy in this game. So if we do this, right, mesh 2D, circle new, let's do circle new 9, color white, and this is 10, color from slate 950. Then we should get the two meshes laid on top of each other. And now we have an outline. So not like a fancy outline, not like a really interesting outline, but like an outline. Like it makes it clear that the ball is separate from the background, which is really all we're looking for. And it gives us a chance to introduce like the children macro, and it does it in a very simple way, right? This isn't like complicated hierarchies of UI or anything. This is very much like we have a circle, we want a slightly smaller circle. So let's do, I don't think avian is on docs.rs yet. Crates.io, whatever. Avian 2D. I don't think there was a publish. I think it's still the Git repo. I think it's worth using avian. I will probably do 2 implementations anyway. That's just the way that this works for me. I think that the avian implementation is going to make more sense. But typically what happens when I have a question like this is instead of guessing, I literally do it. And I try to make them both as good as I can, and then I pick one. So we'll do Bevy. This is going to be avian. Git equals. I am tying myself to like this workshop, if it uses avian, can only ever be updated after avian ships like its stable release. So this workshop inherently can only be like updated after the stable version. It is what it is. I think that there's something really interesting to be said about being able to update all of these in the release candidate phase. And be able to like 0.16 is going to drop any day now, right? It's really nice to be able to be like, hey, 0.16 dropped. Also, all these educational resources that I have are up to date with the stable release. Go check them out. It's like a really great time to be doing that. Especially from like a marketing perspective, right? Avian 2D depends on Bevy with features Bevy log, but Bevy does not have these features. Do we need to drop down to 0 RC3? I think we're gonna pick a different different revision. Failed to select a version for Bevy. Versions that meet the requirements RC2. Let's do a cargo update. So we can't pick a version for some reason. We didn't get another Bevy release today, did we? RC4 is out. I feel like RC4 messed with a couple things that I was working on. Interesting. Bevy doesn't have Bevy log, then what version of Bevy is this targeting? I didn't mean to click into that like that. I didn't even know you could click into that like that. See crates, avian 2D. We also weren't using 2D, we were using 3D. So Where's the Bevy dependency? Bevy dependency says RC, indicates Bevy log. RC4 features. Bevy log does not exist in RC4. RC3. Bevy log exists in RC3. That's unfortunate. Okay, so we need this to be 3 for now, which for the most part doesn't affect us all that much. But it actually needs to be RC3. And unfortunately, there's a long chain of like Git or Bevy crates that get released. So it would be really nice if we didn't have to specify the whole chain of transitive dependencies here. Hoping that this works itself out from a cargo resolution perspective. I have made Rust Analyzer and Cargo fight for my build directory again. I need to put the configuration for Rust Analyzer to put the target directory somewhere else. That's why we see waiting for like lock file effectively, like waiting for the opportunity to operate on the target directory, so that nobody else is. But yeah. So this looks like it's going to work. Crossing my fingers because we could run into a later issue as these Bevy crates are compiling. See, we're still getting like RC4 for a whole ton of things. For the most part, RC3 and RC4 are compatible. In some special circumstances, they're not. And Cargo doesn't differentiate between any of the release candidates. So if you specify release candidate, then it thinks that all of the release candidates are compatible, which is actually not true in some cases. So that's what we will run into if we run into it. If we do run into it, then I'll copy paste the like transitive dependency list into this project, and then have to remove it later when, you know, like RC5 or the stable release comes out. But one of the perils of doing things early. But yeah, by using Avian, I think we're making it easier for people doing the workshop or going through the material. And I think we're making it harder to maintain in an acceptable amount of time. Avian is pretty good about having like a Bevy main release pretty soon after stable. Like right now it does have compatibility with the release candidates. It's just not published. So I'm not terribly worried about that. But it does mean that like 2048 can update and Snake can update and some other things can update, but anything that uses Avian like has to wait until the stable release actually comes out. I waffle a little bit back and forth on like, I could record like 2048 right now, right? This week I could record 2048, but I would have to record it against RC4. And there's always the potential that RC4 and stable have some incompatibility for whatever reason, like some feature flag flips or something like that. So I don't like doing things early. It stresses me out a little bit. But I like having all the code ready. So like 0.16 will drop. I'll do all the recordings for the workshops. I'll post them on Rust Adventure. That'll take me a week to do, and then we'll move on from there. Cool. So we're in. We have our thing launching again. We want To add the plugin, so default plugins and physics plugins. This is physics plugins default these days. We need to bring this into scope. So avian 2D physics plugins. This will cause, if we just start throwing rigid bodies on this stuff, right? This will cause some gravity, etc. kind of issues. So if this is the ball, then if we do a rigid body, and this is a dynamic rigid body in this case, because we kind of want the ball to be behaving in that way. I think that if I was doing like a real quote unquote implementation of like a block breaker or the Arkanoid or whatever, I think this is actually a kinematic body, or just not one at all, right? Like just manually do everything. But I think the dynamic ball makes sense. So we want a collider, and we want it to be in scope. Why is that not in scope? Oh, you know what I didn't do? We should bring in the avian 2D prelude, not just avian. So circle, and then this is 10. And the thing that we can do here while we're doing this to check our math effectively is put physics debug plugin default here. And if we run physics debug plugin default with a collider and a rigid body, then we should see this, and that little red circle around the outline is the actual situation there. This is gravity. We don't want gravity to affect the ball. So we can do gravity 0. I think we can do gravity 0. That seems to have an issue. I guess gravity, maybe not a component. Gravity is a resource. I kind of want gravity for the pills and stuff. I just don't want gravity to affect the ball. Speaking of logs, you need a way of grouping logs in a way that you can disable and enable for debugging only when needed, like Python's logging lib, where you create a logger instance and log from it. Do you know of any way of doing something like this? Like in general or in Bevy? Both of my answers are tracing, but I will explain it differently based on your answer. Like when it comes down to it, your answer is tracing. And tracing, do I have an example? Yes, I think I do have an example. Let me go to the temp, I think, not the plain test. I think this one is the one that has the updates in it. Let me pull this over to a new window. So if we run this, this should run. Right? This is just a demo that I built out that uses animation clips to do linear velocity and rotational velocity. So instead of doing, I don't know if you've been around for the Saturday streams. So the Saturday streams are for like a 3D game with a platform aesthetic and whatever. In that game, we have a problem where we're doing translational movement, like transform movement, and transform-based movement doesn't have physical effects, right? So we need to drive linear and rotational velocity instead That's what this is doing. This is animation clips driving avian's rotational and linear velocity to give these platforms some movement. So if I was like, okay, well, there is, something that I want to know about Bevy skiing, uh, I feel like some of my components aren't applying or whatever, I can use rust log equals Bevy skiing equals trace, cargo run, and that would give me the tracing logs if I didn't remove them in the config, actually. Can I do info? Do I have info logs? I think this is one of the things that makes me, this is the wrong thing, this is the wrong thing, this is the right thing. So in my cargo toml here, I have these two log things that like remove tracing logs, and I think that they really should only be configured in release mode. So if I do rust log equals trace now, my trace logs should be able to show up. It'll just take a second to rebuild because I changed the configuration now. I realized that my face is in the way too here, so. Why is it blocking on the build directory? I'll move this over to the right a little bit so my face isn't blocking it. So if you do rust log equals crate or whatever other path identifier or whatever, in this case equals trace, this turns on trace logs for Bevy skiing's crate only. And this works for a whole bunch of different things. I've used this to trace specific values in specific functions and things like that. But the answer is tracing. Tracing exists in Bevy by default. I think in 0.16 it's exported via Bevy log actually. Yeah, that's the answer. Do tracing, use instrument, use the info error, etc. Macros. Hey Krads, how's it going? I'll wait for this to build so that you can actually see the impact of this filter. I feel like we should remove that from the template. The Bevy new template, that is. The Bevy new template includes those like compile time removals of the trace logs, which is fine in release mode. I don't think it's the right choice for dev. But because of the way we specified all the dependencies, it'll take a second to rebuild. Because that configuration actually affects basically every crate is the issue. The cargo toml configuration, not the rust log environment variable. But yeah, I would say that tracing is probably more powerful than the infrastructure that I've seen in other ecosystems. So like you might create logger in Python, or you might create a logger in JavaScript or whatever. And then you like kind of filter for like all infos or all warnings or whatever. Tracing will let you filter very deeply, even on like specific values. So in this case, before there were no logs, and now there's only the skiing processing logs. So in this case, the Bevy skiing crate inside of the skiing processing function has an event. That event includes an entity with an ID and a cube with a name, and so on and so forth, right? So you can do messages, you can do structured values, you can filter on structured values. So you can use it to trace logs from a specific mod file I have, or you think you misheard. Tracing, or the trace word here, is one of the logging levels, right? So in this case, I've put these logs inside of trace, right? But let's open up tracing for everything, right? And now you see just how much stuff is actually capable of being outputted here. So a lot of this is like WGPU core device global, right? Like if I wanted that, it should be this. And now the only logs that I'm seeing are from WGPU core in the device module in the global function, right? So tracing gives you this ability to filter all the way down, not just to specific like event contexts, but also it can help you do things with specific values and whatnot as well. So like if like winit, platform, impl, Mac OS, app state, if I wanted to like trace all of those for some reason, I can specify that. And now it's easy for me to notice that there's only 2 of them, right? Like this happened, that happened, and all of that other trace logging is filtered out. Yeah, does that answer your question? There's some information about how to do those filters in the tracing docs and stuff. So go to the tracing crate if you're interested in knowing more about like how to filter and how to set up logs and stuff. But tracing is Bevy's default like logging infrastructure. It's also what I would suggest using for, you know, Axum web servers and stuff like that. But yeah. I don't know, linear velocity. This still has gravity on it. I thought gravity was going to be a component. I think maybe gravity scale is the component. So gravity scale 0. Yeah, I think tracing is one of those things that like I would love to spend some time and do like a full workshop on tracing, because it's one of those things that is very deep and hard to get into if you're not already aware of it. But not a lot of people, I feel like, are looking for tracing information. As a last question, could you use the flag for excluding logs instead of filtering? I guess what's the difference between excluding logs and filtering? Maybe let's go for info here. You mean like instead of safe listing, blacklisting? Or blocklisting, sorry. So like here we do info, right? And let's say I wanted to not see this, right? Then I can specify this. Can I do none here? I think it's none info is the syntax. I don't remember the syntax exactly. I don't remember the log levels either. I only use like 2 log levels. I use info and I use whatchamacallit, trace. If I want something to be accessible but never shown unless you explicitly want it, I use trace. And if I want somebody to actually see it, I use info. What are the other levels? Trace, debug, info, warn, and error. Let's do error. So now you're filtering down Bevy renderer only for things that are errors, and everything else logs info. So you can go both ways, right? You can specify something to only look at that, or you can specify something to exclude that. But yeah, that's all tracing stuff. Let's do linear velocity. I don't know, 5, 5. We'll pick a random linear velocity. I think it needs to be negative y, but it's way, way too slow. Let's do negative 50. Let's do negative 5 too. Let's send it, well, let's do 5. Probably like 20 would be better. Still very slow. Let's do like 250. I think that's reasonable. That's reasonable, and I also like the way that if you don't move the paddle, it still hits the paddle. So then we need a rigid body here. Kinematic, collider, rectangle. I think this is the full length. It used to be the half extents, if I remember correctly. I can never remember like what is a half extent and what is an actual full. Okay, there we go. So that happens. And then we need to like, because we make this physical, we need like restitution. And I forget what the restitution values are supposed to be. Yeah, 1 is exactly what we wanted. Perfectly elastic collisions that tries to preserve all kinetic energy. So now it bounces off. I think there's still like some default friction values and stuff. So you can see how like defining like friction and everything is kind of like overkill for what we're doing here, right? Like we don't want friction, we don't want restitution, we don't want all of this stuff. But the option is, do you define all these components with all these values, or do you implement the collision logic yourself? And that's really the trade-off for the workshop. Is this about implementing collision logic, or is this about, you know, building a small block breaker game? You can always choose to implement the collision logic yourself, right? So in general, we kind of want this everywhere, right? We want perfectly elastic collisions with everything, no friction involved. The ball kind of like goes as you would expect it now. It will fly off the screen because we don't have any like thing to contain it. But yeah. So we now have the opportunity, we'll call it, to build like some kind of container in here, right? Um, how are we going to build a box around the level? We can do a couple of different things, I feel like. Also, we probably want continuous collision detection, but we haven't gotten there yet, so I'm not going to add it yet. Basically, this will be like if the ball is moving really, really quickly, it should still bounce off things. Um, doo, 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 doo. So we can do 4 half spaces, which I think would solve our problem. The like what I really want is kind of like an inverted rectangle, but I don't think that that is like easily supported, if that makes sense. So I think that half spaces are probably the way to go. Which means we do need like 4 of them. And this will always be present. So we'll throw it up here. There's going to be 4 of them. We could put it on an entity and then do a section of children, right? We could do like a spawn empty or a spawn, transform. I don't think we have 0. Is there a default? There's a default, right? So like we could do this and then we could do children and this would be each of the half spaces, right? Which is kind of nice from like a code organization perspective. And we get to offset from wherever we want to center our board. So this will be rigid body, static, because they're not going to move, collider, half space, right? And we do a vec3, or I guess a vec2 in this case, a vec2 of what are we going to do here? This is going to be a half space with a normal. I think this is just the direction. So we could do like X, right? Why is this causing me so many issues? Spawn, transform, children. Does this need to be a bundle? I think it does. Yeah. So spawn as a transform. So at 0, 0, we have some children. Those children are going to be half spaces. We're going to have half spaces in 2, 3, 4 each direction, right? So X, I think neg X is the other one, and then Y and neg Y. And these have to be positioned somewhere, so they will all need a transform. Right? So if we just start these off with zeros, then we get to do, however big our board should be, more or less. In this case, I think, let's start off with like 300. These are the opposite directions. So I think this has to be 300 and this has to be negative 300. Because if the half space is pointing this way, then we want the border of that to be the other direction. It's possible I just messed this up, but that's fine. So let's do like, what was the height? 1080. So canvas size minus 20. We'll say it's like 20 off the top. not over 20, minus 20. And it's dot y. So if this is 1080, then I guess this is over 2 minus 20, right? So y is 1080, half of 1080 minus 20. That'll put the top one in the right spot, I think. And then this one needs to be negative. No, this one needs to be positive and the other one needs to be negative. So if we run this with half spaces, that looks a little weird. The ball isn't moving, so I feel like I messed up the directionals. One thing that always confuses me personally is which direction of the half space is actually the collision. Like which is full and which isn't. So let's start with just x's. So this should be fine, right? The ball isn't moving. I wish there was some kind of like directional debug for half spaces. So this is good for the XY. Hopefully that bounces. Yeah. So the X's are good here. So the inverse is the correct way to do that. And then we've got these, which I think are simply just not far enough. All right, this looks like it's at 0, effectively. So let's start with one of them. And we get a line like right in the middle. So canvas size dot y, like 1080, right? Over 2, 960, 940. Which in my mind feels like, oh, you know what the problem is? I made a silly mistake, is what I did. I did those as the x values, and they shouldn't be. They're the y values. Right, so now we have top and bottom defined by this half space. This can't go out of bounds up there. These half spaces need to have the same settings, right? The restitution and stuff. So this is the trade-off that we're seeing here between using avian and not, because we either need to specify the physical properties of everything, which we want to be 0 friction, 100% restitution, right? Or we could do something else. But like this is effectively, you know, Arkanoid or whatever. We don't have like paddle limits here. And actually, I don't know what the original Arkanoid does. Can you go off screen? I feel like it'll stop you at some point. I also don't necessarily think that that's a problem, especially for what this is. Let's see. There's like a max velocity of some kind, right? What are the defaults for damping is a question that I have. This is joints. Fixed joint, revolute joint. Is damping only for joints? I thought it was for more stuff than just that. Yeah, linear damping. No damping is the default. Perfect. That's what we want. What else is in here? Oh, I guess default friction is what we really want to set. This is a resource. Yep. So let's do default friction up here. Right. And then is there a 0 here? Let's do that instead of doing like all these combine rules and stuff. And then we get to remove friction from everything. Because we've now defined that. I wonder if there's the same thing for restitution, like default restitution. That would be cool. The only downside of doing it like this is realistically, I think Brick Breaker, like the further out on the paddle you are, the more velocity you get, or like the more angular change you get. And this is just like, that'll bounce up and to the right when that should have bounced to the left. But we can always fix that. So let's go for default. It's interesting that there's a default friction, but there's no default restitution. Here's a default restitution. Restitution, combine rule, new one. So we'll look for restitution now, and this will be 4, 5, 6. That should be it. So now we don't need to set these on everything. We can just set them globally. Like we've defined the parameters for the environment, which is much nicer. The other thing that we could do is we can like lock the axes of the ball and stuff so that it doesn't like start spinning. Because technically speaking, I think you could end up in a situation where it starts spinning and thus the velocity, like the linear velocity, gets converted into angular. And we don't really want that either. I feel like that's hard to show, right? Like, understanding that that exists and that you would potentially need to deal with that is body clamping, max angular speed, max linear speed. Is there a min linear speed? That would be very cool. I guess that's just making sure that the linear velocity vector is always of a certain magnitude. Otherwise, this seems pretty okay. And then the answer to like, what do we do here is, if we want to define blocks, I have a level here. Here's a level. I think that defining levels like this is a little bit awkward. So one of the things that I was thinking about doing is do pubmod levels, I guess. I think I want the concept of like a level, so to speak. I don't know that it really matters. I'm trying to think about like, so if we do this, we haven't used any kind of grid yet. We haven't used any kind of anything else that would be like level designy in that sense. Right now, if you want to place a brick, you kind of just have to place it arbitrarily, which is not the worst thing, right? If you wanted to spawn a level, and realistically, is having 2 levels worth it for this game, for this workshop? I don't think so. This is always the hard part, or not the hard part necessarily, but like it's always the like conversation. Everything, if I was gonna go play Arkanoid on Steam, or like any kind of block breaker game, I would want multiple levels. I would want, you know, maybe a save game, maybe some scoring, like different kinds of effects and collectibles and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, how much of that actually matters? Because to some extent, workshops are a jumping off point for people to modify, right? You go through the workshop, you understand the code. At that point, you want there to be things for these people to do, right? If you want to design multiple levels, you want them to have to figure out how to design multiple levels. Like you don't want to trick them or anything. You don't want to like prevent them from doing it. But you want it to be like, okay, if you want multiple levels, think about how you would like create and store multiple levels. Don't provide everything, right? And I think we have the infrastructure for that, right? Like we have on enter do thing, right? So what starts to happen, like how do you think about different levels, etc. And that kind of like extension point is really important. So like I think when it comes down to that, HDR doesn't make sense, right? Because why does HDR matter? It doesn't. So in that vein, then when we start a new game, we will just set up some bricks, and we're gonna set we're gonna just throw them into some spot, right? So let's see, rectangle here is really what we want. These are going to be fixed rigid bodies, really, so they'll be static. They'll be state scoped. They will be bricks instead of paddles. Their colliders are going to be a little bit thicker than the paddle, maybe 40 or 60. And they will be lengthwise, maybe double their height. So this ends up being 80. This ends up being 40. There's going to be a couple of different colors maybe, but let's make this component brick. And if we run, then what we get is a brick right on top of the paddle. These are never going to collide, so they're not supposed to really collide with each other. They're supposed to collide with the ball. So I think that's a fine brick size, right? And then so 80/40, let's do like, I don't know, blue 400, right? For the color here. And let's do yada, yada, yada. And then we need to do like collision detection on these at some point. We need to place them in the right spot. So in this case, we will start placing these at, I guess we know where the top of the screen is. We don't really care because we're not going to line up the bricks with the top. So let's start with 3/8 up. That seems fine from a Y perspective. And we'll do 4 like I X. At least in Rapier, collision would not work if you move the transform manually as you do in your input AD keys. At least in Rapier, collision would not work if you move the transform manually as you do in your input AD keys. Yeah, I mean, there's no linear velocity on the paddle right now, right? So that does have implications, right? But the only thing that we actually care about is the ball colliding with the paddle, which we know it already does. So it really doesn't matter from that perspective, right? We could use linear velocity now that we have let's see, 4 transforming paddles if input pressed, like else, and we do linear velocity, right? With paddle. And if we do it this way, then we get, I don't want transform here. I want velocity. And this is just a velocity dot X. And we don't need to do the plus or the minus, right? We need to do equals, and this will be 0. And if we run this, this should run. And then we get this real slow moving paddle that will eventually make it to the side. Let's do, for example's sake, let's do a 10x on the, I think this is still pretty small, but I don't want it to go down there. I just want it to overlay. Right. Right, so paddle's pretty small. I'm doing the same in both directions, aren't I? But even setting linear velocity doesn't cause it to collide with the side. Right? That's really what I would love in this case. But it doesn't buy us that if we set linear velocity. Well, I guess technically, this has to have linear velocity on it because it's moving, right? So, but like, I don't know that we gain anything from like using linear velocity in this particular case, right? There's never going to be a brick down here. The kinematic collider kind of makes it like our fault if we put it in the wrong spot. God, that's so slow. But like we don't really need it. And I think that while it's okay to drive it, I don't know that it adds anything, right? Let's not multiply this. Let's do like 200 here. So like what's the benefit of doing linear velocity over transform? Did I really just mess up the calculation again? I did. Other than the fact that I keep messing up my negatives. Like I guess technically speaking, if we set a linear velocity, then it theoretically could affect the ball. I don't know that it really is doing much, right? Like even if we are moving against the ball, it doesn't really do anything. And it doesn't help us like not do collision against the walls. Like it doesn't lock the thing into the. So while it's probably like better in like an ideological sense, I don't think it actually has any impact. At least in Rapier, manually using the transform would introduce bugs when frame rate drops, making objects bypass the collision. Would introduce bugs when frame rate drops. I'm not really expecting frame rate issues to be a focus of this workshop. Like, I get what you're saying. I also wonder if you were moving the transform outside of the fixed update. Right? Like if you're moving the transform in the update system, that means something different than moving the transform in the fixed update. Especially when it comes to Avian, which has like transform interpolation built in. I think that's one of the differences between Rapier and Avian at the moment. Bevy transform interpolation is the crate name. Let's go to the thing here. So this is included in Avian by default. Yeah. I just think it's interesting. That's why I'm bringing it up. This is basically like if you do a transform manipulation inside of the fixed update system, then this will interpolate that for you, which is pretty cool. So I think it might be less of an issue. I haven't obviously tested this application at low frame rates. So I think when it comes down to it, you could just drop this into a Rapier application. But it's worth noting that like where you do your transform manipulation can have different impact, especially if you start thinking about fixed update versus update and what that means. Because like transform is teleportation, right? But if you're doing transform in fixed update and you have interpolation on, then your thing is being interpolated between those teleportation points. So like, yeah. I think doing linear velocity is fine. It makes sense. We're now using Avian. It's not that difficult to be like to set this up and be like, yeah, we started with transform and then we introduced Avian, so let's use linear velocity. Like that's pretty straightforward. The only downside is like limits start to get a little bit more complicated and stuff like that. Because like how do you prevent the paddle from going into a specific location? You have to kind of like detect the collision and then do something. Yeah. Anyway, doesn't matter. I don't even know that I'm going to restrict the paddle anyway. So yeah. So this is like for I in 0.5, right? We want to do this. And this is going to be like let brick size equals vec2 new 8040, which is kind of nice because now we can take this and do, what happened there? I thought that was going to select the bottom one. I guess I didn't have the 0 here, did I? Oh well. Brick size.x, right? And this is brick size.y. And then we can do things like brick size times I, and like minus I as F32, I guess, minus brick size times 5/2. Expected F32, found vec2, brick size.x. Right? So this is like the same logic that I would have had if we were doing the board stuff anyway. And like, it doesn't really matter that this is, you know, ad hoc sized. Num bricks per row, I guess I'll name this explicitly. I don't like having magic numbers, especially in educational material. So even if it's kind of like, this is a weird num bricks per row as F32. So now we need to do an extra conversion, but like, does it really matter? Not really. So like now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I have a question around why it looks like it's offset and not centered, and I think that's because we need to add brick size over 2. So like the math starts to get a little bit like unfun, if that makes sense. Like now this is not just brick location or whatever, but it's like brick size minus half of the width of the total bricks plus whatever, plus half of the size of a brick. Like if you want gaps here, then you need to do like plus brick gap, right? And like, where do you think about placing your like brick gaps? Because if you try to do something where it's like brick space, brick space, brick space, then you have nothing on the outsides. And how does the math line up versus doing like space, brick, space, brick, space, brick? So in this case, we want a brick gap times I, right? But this places, I think we start at 0, so we're good here. Let's do like 10. I don't know. Just pick a random number. What's wrong with that number? Oh, as F32, right. So now you got this, and then you kind of be like, okay, well, that's too much. I got to do the addition for like, now we have brick gaps added to like the total size, right? So it's like num bricks per row over 2, and it's brick size dot x plus brick gap. And like this is like small workoutable math. But it's just like, okay, so this is happening, and then why is it like that? And then you're like, okay, well, it needs to be like plus brick gap like over 2, right? And this just starts to be a little bit meh in terms of, okay, I'm gonna show you a thing, and we're gonna talk about all of this math. Like this math isn't like hard math, but it's just not fun to put into a workshop, right? It's not fun to be like this and then that and then this plus that plus half of this plus. So I think we'll stick with this. One thing we could do is put outlines on these bricks like we'd put outlines on the other ones. We could do multiple rows, like 4 rows of bricks, right? What is the brick setup in Arkanoid? Come on, show me gameplay. They're all just stacked together. They all have outlines on them. So like we could add outlines. So 4 rows, which means 4 row in rows, or 0 dot dot 4 rows, whatever. I like using Cartesian product here, but it's not worth installing iter tools to just have access to Cartesian product. Why is that unhappy? Oh, because I made it a floating point. Right. So now we've got row. And then this has to also be row stuff. So this is like canvas size dot y plus whatever as the starting point plus brick height. Right. Times row. And I think we can get away with it being that simple. So it's kind of working its way upwards, which I don't want. I want it to work its way downwards. So now we have, you know, bricks. We could make them of different colors or whatever. They bounce, et cetera, et cetera. Let's do, where's our bricks? These are all of our bricks. So we could do mesh material like this. And this could be Slate 950. And this could be children. And this could be right. I think these are going to be better off as small. It should be centered, so we should end up with, let's get rid of the physics debug stuff because that's kind of like overlapping with what we would consider our outlines. So we've got outlines, we've got bricks. We don't have any indicator that there is like a surrounding area. We should probably make one. That's just a like spawn a sprite, right? So setup, where's setup or startup? Spawn. right? And then we already spawn a rectangle here, right? I'm glad you're enjoying it. Have a great rest of your day. So this is canvas size dot x and canvas size dot y minus 40. And this is not that. This is just like color, color, white, right? I don't think we have an outline component, but maybe we do. This is exactly the size that we would need it to be. I want it to be a little bit bigger and actually be an outline if we can. I don't think we have a sprite outline. I am checking. I think this is a UI outline. Yeah, UI node outline. Outline builder for text, layout line. Let's go check sprite, color flip, rect, anchor, image mode. So I think we would actually need to just set up an image. Got texture slicer and scale, tiled. I don't think we can do anything fancy with like custom size and rect. So if we were going to do this, we would have to set up like the borders, I think, or use maybe a mesh 2D. I don't think it's that important, right? Like, I don't think it's worth introducing a whole bunch of extra stuff. So I think we're just going to do with alpha, like 0.2 maybe. And we'll drop this in and we'll do this. And now there's like a little white background. We'll get rid of the physics debug plugins so that we can see stuff. So like, would it be nice if there was a border there? Yeah. Does there really need to be? Not really. And then we need to do collision. So avian collision event, right? Or collision ended, a collision event. This is effectively what we need. Yada yada, all the way down here, print collisions. I think I already wrote this for the other stuff, but we'll collision events. We have two ways to do this basically. There's colliding entities, where if we put colliding entities on the ball, then we would be able to tell anything that was colliding with the ball. We could also do it with collision events like this. Colliding entities might be easier. Let's start with colliding entities and then choose to move away from it if it's not enough. Still using Typist? Yep. Typist is great. Love Typist. They're going to get HTML output fairly soon. I know they already have it. It's just not fully featured yet or like fully released. So very hyped for that. Typist is how I write PDFs these days. So yeah, huge fan of Typist. I have plans to actually publish like paperback books of the content that I put on Rust Adventure. And for that, I will use Typist. Or I am using Typist is really how I should phrase that. I just don't tell people that I'm doing it. Where's our ball? Here's our ball. Colliding entities. Default. So let's do FN ball collision query for colliding entities with ball. We also need the bricks, which will be a query for probably entity. We'll already have the entity, so we probably don't need it, because if we have a colliding entity and it is a brick, then we'll know. So like unit with brick would be enough. And colliding entities needs to be a shared reference. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of the Typist people and what they're doing. I like the project. I like the tool. I guess there isn't guaranteed to be only one ball. We've covered this. So for ball in query, let's call this balls because I want to differentiate the two queries. If ball dot what? This is colliding entities. What's the best way to find one of these in the other? Bricks.get is what I think we're going to have to do. We kind of have that on both. So I think we either iterate over all the bricks or we iterate over all the colliding entities. I think iterating over all the colliding entities is the better choice. I think that's just an entity. Yeah. So bricks.get E. If let sum E underscore, because we don't care. I'm gonna sneeze. If let sum equals bricks.get E, then we are going to probably drop this into a bricks to despawn. Bricks to despawn. Because like we could do commands dot entity e dot despawn, and this is recursive in 0.16, which is cool, right? So commands here. I also like putting commands first when we use it, so I'm going to throw that up there, put a comma on it. This is probably okay and not sum, and this probably needs to be a reference. Sorry, a dereference. Gonna get rid of that. Ball collision then goes up in fixed update. This is update, restart game. This is fixed update, paddle controls. We're also gonna do the collision and fixed update because it is game logic. Have you used Typist, Gob? Or Gob? I don't know which one. Right, so we can get some weird behavior sometimes, but I think actually for the purpose of this particular demo, I don't think it matters. I think we do need to do some paddle directional stuff. Like we need to, based on how far you are from the paddle, give it a little bit more of a like X directional oomph. But this is Brick Breaker. Like there's not a whole lot more to the game. We could do like whatchamacallit, ball despawn area, probably something that we should do if it passes the paddle. What else is required? Power-ups we could do optionally. Realistically, I think everything else gives you the opportunity to figure out how to do that yourself. If there is a collision, then you can fire an event. That event will then cause the thing to spawn and to drop from where it is. You throw a sensor on it, which we didn't really explain, but we'll do a sensor for the like ball trap area. So I think that that's reasonable. Then you have to throw colliding entities on the paddle. You have to figure out when it touches a power up and then do something in response, which I think is okay as a like next step. So let's make sure we spawn like this downwards area. We need what? We need this position. Right, canvas size over 2 minus 20 in the negative direction. This is not really, I don't really think we need to make this a sprite, but it might be nice to have a color there. So let's do it anyway. This will be canvas size.x, and this will be, I guess, not canvas size.y, it'll be whatever we want. So the canvas size dot y over 8 is the distance. Right, this minus 20, I think, is the right height. Right, paddle is canvas size dot y over 8. If we cut that in half, we have to subtract the 20 before we cut it in half, so it would be minus 40 on the outside. And then this positionally needs to be, this is the position of the bottom wall, right? So if we do this, and we do plus canvas size dot y over 8 over 2, I'm writing that specifically as 8 over 2 because over 8 is what we use in other places, and I want to make it recognizable pattern match wise. Because otherwise we could just do over 16, right? But this makes it like canvas size.y over 8 is something that we not only use here and here, but we also use like other places, right? 3 over 8 here. So if we place this at halfway up from the bottom, I think we need to add the 20 here, actually. Right? I think that's a positional thing that is not a... So let's see how bad my math is. It is the opposite. So it was this, and I pushed it down. So what did I do wrong? Oh, hey, Jacob. How's it going? Let's make this alpha like 8 here, just so that it shows up. I think I pushed it down below the bottom of the screen is what I did. You can see it down here. So it needs to be like up that little bit, which just means that I put it canvas y over 2 minus 20. Canvas y over 2 is the bottom half, minus 20. Puts it south 20. Or rather, shrinks it. And then to that, right, negative, oh, that puts it all the way at the bottom. So we need to add 20 here, actually. And then that's that. And then canvas size, y over x. This is got to be a subtraction. Because we invert it with the subtraction already. So this is the right spot. And realistically, we probably want like half the paddle size subtracted from this as well. So really this is negative this plus that. Yeah. And then take this back down to like a 2 alpha. We'll want it to be behind the paddle. I gave it the wrong size. So this is 8 over 2. So over 8 over 20 maybe. And then negative canvas size over 2 plus 20 minus 20 in because we inverted it. So I'm going to nudge this to the right 20 because I just want it to be a little bit easier to debug. Right? So it's pretty clear about which one of these things is in the wrong spot, which means that this needs to go down 20. If it went down full paddle size, I think is 40. Is paddle size 20? So this is 10 down here. So move 10 minus 10 width. Or height, sorry. Move it down 10. And this will sit at the bottom of the paddle if I do my math correctly, and set these to 10 instead of 30. Simple math. It will get me every time. It still bugs me that that's not the right spot. But I will have to figure out the exact right spot for that too. Right, there's just that little bit. And it needs to be smaller in height, even smaller in height. So that's probably my issue. So this is the height. Let's leave height at negative 20. That lines up. And that's halfway on the paddle, which is, I think, just fine. I think halfway on the paddle is really like, if it passes the paddle, we're supposed to have the sensor there. So I think that's all fine. This is not supposed to be that wide. Do I want this to be white? I think I want this to be something else. Let's do sky 400. We'll do color from with alpha. So we get like a nice blue overlay down there. I could always swap up any of these colors that I want to, but it basically gives the vibe of there's a playing area, we've identified the borders, there's bricks to hit. When this goes through, this needs to be a sensor and it needs to collide there. I guess we can just do collision instead. We don't really need it to be a sensor. So this is going to be the respawn ball area, right? Ball, paddle, brick, respawn ball area. Respawn ball area is going to come all the way down here. We're going to search for it. We're going to query for anything with it. With respawn ball area, respawn areas. This is all happening there. And then we do for, I guess the entity is the ball, so we can do it in here. If let okay underscore equals respawn areas dot get entity. Then we just go to the other state. So next state set app state game over. And this is going to come from the same thing that we're doing here. Literally the same thing. So now when we hit that area, we probably should put a collider on it of some kind. Respawn area. Right? And then this is like collider. Same as this, right? Collider rectangle, are we calling this these days? Ta-da! And we can throw a sensor on it. I think sensors will show up in the colliding entities. Pretty sure it will. Haven't tested that recently. So there we go. Game over. We now have, oh, I sent that all the way up. It's going to take a second. All right, so we hit a couple blocks, comes all the way down, and we're good. Then you get to play again. Oh, that's an interesting mesh ordering issue. I think I saw people talking about that in the RC. There's a subtle like issue where the meshes can be in the wrong order. There's like a race condition of some kind. I'm pretty sure that'll be fixed before the RC goes out. It's interesting that it's always like the same, right? Or is that like my fault? That might be my fault, actually. I think that I assumed that putting one mesh as a child of the other was enough. Sprite, color, to children, right, rectangle. I assumed that this was enough to put it in front of the other one. I still think it is. I think that's actually a bug. Right? Because like, it doesn't happen all the time, and it's so consistent. Oh, don't go all the way up. No. So the only other thing to do for this game is paddle directional input. See, it only happens after you've despawned some others, which makes it feel like a bug. I know there's a race condition with meshes right now. Those are sprites though. So really interesting. I'll look deeper into that. But yeah, the only other thing that I can think of doing is paddle directional input. So like how far you are from the center of the paddle when you hit it can influence the direction. But overall, I'm fairly happy with this. It feels fairly small and concise, right? It is not terribly complicated. It uses some concepts, right? Like it's 300 lines of code total. We don't need this levels stuff. We don't need the full board. We got rid of all that extra complexity. I mean, we didn't get rid of it. It's kind of like embedded in the other one, but you know, like something about just having a main, having 300 lines of code makes this very concise in that way. There's not a lot of stuff going on here. This is a good intro level using Avian set of stuff. So I think I'm pretty happy with that. It took us about 2 hours to build this, which is cool. We built built a Bevy game in 2 hours. This version of it, I believe I can turn into a workshop. The other version felt too messy to turn into a workshop. I think the only thing that I really need to add to this is I need to add the paddle directional control, because otherwise it's not like, it doesn't feel like it's really the game without the paddle being able to direct the ball a little bit more. But otherwise, very happy with this. Probably change the colors a bit. Happy with that as 2 hours of work. That'll be it for today. I'll be live again on Saturday. This week in Bevy should be coming out inside of the next like half hour or so on the channel. I just need to finish up the edit, which I'm going to do now that I'm stopping stream. Thanks for hanging out, everyone, and I will see you probably on Saturday.